Live stream check. Checking the sound for the live stream. Mic 2 check. Check mic 2.
Okay, great. Right, welcome to the third part of our financial literacy talk. Again, like I've said in the last two, unfortunately, it's one of those evenings where in 45 minutes we have to cover a vast part of financial literacy. And so there's going to be a lot of stuff that we literally are just going to tap and move forward and go through it. And so there may be a lot of questions. And we're sorry about that, but yeah, it's one of those things. To try and condense these topics into 45 minutes becomes quite difficult. So I'm going to start off again, just a recapping. You can just have the slide of says just a quick recap of where we've come from and sort of where we're moving to. So we started out that first week just having a look at who we are, our money personalities, and why we do certain things with money. Going on to what the importance of just budget and planning and creating that sort of emergency fund that's going to be so important for you. And then last week we had a look at sort of the family dynamics and money inside of our homes and just the importance of starting early. And when I say start early is in homes, is just that we're having these discussions in homes with kids, that our children are sort of exposed to dealing with decision making around money. And so when they do eventually enter the world of work and they're earning their own salaries, they've already kind of had that opportunity to make mistakes with money. They've learned how to manage money. They've been given those opportunities. And so tonight we move on to the next phase, and we're having a look at tax and tax planning, and then into investments and your retirement planning. And we're lucky tonight. I've invited a colleague of mine who's a tax expert. He's not going to like me when I say that. He's a tax expert, and so instead of me sort of dabbling in the tax environment, I've asked him just to come and spend a few minutes just chatting around just tax and tax planning. And again, hopefully just gives you a little bit of knowledge as to what is happening out there and why, and then also maybe just for your own understanding going forward, maybe there's one or two things that just makes your life a little bit easier as far as just what you do. And so I'm going to introduce you, Johan Rousseau. So my colleague, he's going to come and take over and just run through the next sort of small section on tax and tax planning.
Important for the online. Okay. I'm Johan, Sheldon's colleague, and I always draw the short straw. I've got to talk about tax, and I don't like tax any more than you do. But often I feel like the tax collector. I've got to take your money and give it to SARS. But I remind you that Matthew was a tax collector, and he ended up being a disciple. So I still stand a good chance getting through the gates one day. Right, so in our country, we've got over 20 different types of taxes. Can I move? We've got over 20 different types of taxes, and there's a whole list of them, and they each have their own rules and dynamics. And to be honest, I don't think there's one person in this country who understands all of them. But the ones that are relevant to you, I've circled, and I'm just going to sort of try and explain to you how those taxes affect you, and I'm doing it by using an example. Otherwise, it just gets way too complicated. All right, so the best way down is to say, right, I've got two guys here. One guy's called Job, one guy's called Bob, and Job is your typical employee. So most of us, we work, we get a salary into our bank account at the end of the month, and that's the end of our worries. In theory, our tax has already been paid. So our employer has withheld tax from us, and he's paid the net amount into our bank account, and that's it. Bob, on the other hand, he's a guy who runs his own business. So from his point of view, he doesn't earn a salary. He's got to wheel and deal, and he's got to make money, and he calls that a profit. And so in Bob's case, he's got tax waiting for him to pay, unlike Job, whose tax has already been paid. So in my example, if Job earns a salary of 20,000 Rand and Bob earns a profit of 20,000 Rand, they both pay the same tax. And I think this is where people get confused, because in conversation, this guy moans about his tax, and this guy doesn't pay tax, and that guy does pay tax, and he wants to change his accountant because why is he paying so much tax? But the truth is we're all paying the same tax. And in this scenario, if I had to take Job's salary and I took Bob's salary or his profit, and I apply these tax rates, they both end up paying exactly the same amount of tax. Now these tax rates, all that is SARS gives us percentages and says if you earn so much, slot your amount into this table and you'll work out what your tax is, and that's what you got to pay us. And so Job needs to do that, Bob needs to do that, they'll get to the same amount. The only difference between these two is when you pay it. So in Job's scenario, Job gets a payslip, and his payslip would show you've earned 20,000 Rand for the month. We've deducted tax that we call pay as you earn. We've paid it across to SARS, and we'll pay the net amount into your bank account. And in Bob's case, he doesn't get a payslip because he's not employed. He works for himself. And so Bob needs to understand that he's also going to pay his tax to SARS, but he's not going to be able to pay it monthly like Job. He's got to pay it twice a year. In August, he's got to pay half of his tax to SARS, and in February, he's got to pay the other half. And so Bob is the disgruntled guy because he's physically got to pay money to SARS, and Job never paid his money to SARS. It was withheld before he got his money. And that's where people often get confused between not paying tax and paying tax, but essentially we are all paying the same amount of tax. So the question I get asked a lot is, how do I reduce my tax? And then in sort of inverted commas, legitimately. And there's not much you can do being a job or a bob. And I think I haven't heard the first 2 weeks talk, but the most common way of reducing tax is a retirement annuity, which probably would have covered all. So retirement planning and a medical aid is most probably your go-to thing to save a bit of tax. And just to show you the effect of it. So take job. So job earns a salary of 20,000 Rand a month. So that's 240,000 Rand a year. And we calculate his tax and we have 25,000 Rand. If Job had to contribute towards a retirement annuity of 1,000 Rand a month, his tax drops to 23,000 Rand a year. So in theory, he saved 2,000 Rand by saving in himself. And if you want to get really smart, you sort of argue in the lines of, well, I've saved 12,000 Rand up into a fund. I've saved 2,000 Rand's tax. So in theory, I've actually just paid 9,000 Rand to save 12,000 Rand. And that's the power of retirement savings. If you've got a medical aid, there's a formula that SARS gives us in terms of how much tax you save. But in this case, if just Job takes out a little medical aid and he just caters for himself, he can drop his tax quite considerably and end up saving 6,500 Rand in a year in terms of tax. The trick though is belonging to a retirement annuity and belonging to a medical aid means you've got to pay it. And often, from a Rand and cents point of view, you often got to pay more money out of your bank account than what you would have if you just paid your tax. But you're paying something towards yourself. You're paying towards retirement, and you're covering yourself against a medical emergency, which is often worth a lot more than just saving the money in your bank account. There's a lot more to tax. If you are someone who owns your own business, you would have come across companies and trusts, and so there's a lot more to the tax world if you veer into that space. And so often someone like Bob, who works for himself, would most probably want to have his trading in a company. And if you are someone that's you tired of paying tax and you're sort of self-employed, it's something to consider and chat to your accountant about. And just to briefly illustrate, so a company has a flat rate of tax of 27%. And so if Bob had to trade in a company, we won't tax his profits according to this sliding scale. We basically just apply a percentage of 27%. So in Bob's case, where he would pay tax of 26,000 Rand just being self-employed, if he were to trade in a company, his tax is a lot higher. So you'd often wonder, why should I do it? But if you made R1 million profit, your company's tax is a lot lower than trading in your own name. So tax isn't that straightforward. There are mechanisms of planning around it, but there's certainly room to save tax if you just box a bit smarter. Right, the last tax I just quickly want to explain to you, and it affects everybody without you really knowing it, and that's VAT. Okay. So VAT is basically SARS's go-to place to collect money. And so again, I'm just going to explain it to the example. So Job's employed. He can't register for VAT, meaning that he can't charge someone VAT when he sells something, and when he buys something from the shop, he can't go to SARS and say, I'd like VAT back. where Bob is a guy who can go to SARS and say, I'd like to register for VAT. And what that means is if I do work for someone and I'm going to charge them 100 Rand, I must add on VAT on top of that, which means 15 Rand. So VAT rate is 15%. So Bob's going to give you an invoice of 115 Rand. And so where Bob would have cost you 100 Rand, he's costing you 115. So to you, he's more expensive. And what Bob does is he takes that 15 Rand extra and he pays it across to SARS. And that's it. That's how SARS makes their money. And they basically took it from you. And so this is a very good example, which I think a lot of people can relate to, especially with home improvements. Someone like Bob would, put it this way, if Job wanted to build onto his house, he wants to build on a room, and he can't do it because he's a salaried employee, he's an accountant, so he actually needs Bob to build it for him. Job would go to Bob and say, look, please build me my entertainment room. And Bob would have to go to the shops and he'd sort of have to buy all of these things, and he'd have to pay the shops, in my example, all these different amounts, and all those amounts, every shop will charge Bob 15% on top of those amounts. So Bob would go to Game, he'd buy the TV, he'd pay them whatever they want to pay, and Game would go to SARS and they'd pay across the 15% extra that Bob had to pay SARS. What Bob would do then is Bob would build the room and he would then invoice Job you 100,000 Rand, for argument's sake, for the work that he's done. And he's got to charge you 15% on top of his invoice. So what's happening here is Bob's going to the shops and he's paying 5,600 Rand VAT to the shops, and the shops need to pay SARS that money, and Job is paying Bob 15,000 Rand, and Bob needs to take that money and give it to SARS as well. And so you don't feel it, but you're paying this tax to SARS in your daily living. And if you just sit still and you run through the normal things you buy every month, and you just add the little 15% that you've paid on all those items, I think you'll get a fright of how much VAT or tax you've actually paid to SARS over and above your normal pay as you earn or tax that you do pay on your profits if you've got a business. So just in conclusion, so what SARS reckons is from the tax you pay on your salary, or if you've got a business, your business profits, and the VAT that you pay monthly, they reckon that's where they get about 60% of all their money from. And it's difficult to try to explain how much tax SARS does collect. So, 1.68 billion Rand, I don't know how big that number is, but it's quite a lot of tax that we pay. And so I try to punch it into my calculator, and I can only fit in the numbers in the red block. And so my point is the power of tax. So a little thing that we all pay VAT, or we all pay a little bit of tax. It might be a small amount towards us, but as a country, it's quite a lot of money. And that's why there's a big hoo-ha if SARS wants to increase the VAT rate from 14 to 15%. Or every year in February when they do the budget talk, there's always a big hoo-ha about the little things they want to change. But the little things have quite a big impact. And so to put that amount in perspective, what I said is, okay, well, if Job pays 26,000 Rand a year, he's got to pay his tax 64 million times to get to the amount of tax that SARS collects in a year, which means that there should be 64 jobs in this country paying that amount of tax to get to that total. So in short, it's a difficult technical world, tax. It's it's a lot to explain. There's a lot of technicalities in it, but there's certainly room to plan and there's certainly room to save. And as a salary earner, which I think most of us are, retirement planning and investing in retirement funds is most probably your go-to when it comes to tax, and the medical aid is most probably something to consider after that. Right. Any time for questions?
Thanks. I'll stay on this side. It's fine. Good? Yeah, if you're not depressed enough after that, I'm sure to add to your depression. I've put the disclaimer up here. I probably should have put it up right in the beginning for the people who have joined the course thinking that this is going to solve all your financial problems. Okay, so tonight, especially when we're chatting about investments and retirement planning, one is it's not going to be a get-rich-quick option, and it's definitely not going to fix holes that are not there. I'm going to give you a sort of a broad overlook on it, and again, it's going to be very much dependent on each individual person as to what they do with that information. So I want to start off just quickly with this, and this is where a lot of people, I think, initially have a misconception or make a mistake, is that there's a big difference between saving and investing. Saving is the kind of thing that I've been speaking about, of putting money into the envelope, sticking money aside. You're saving for a purpose that's potentially going to happen to you in 12 months or 2 years. It's a short-term thing where you're putting money aside for a specific goal that's about to happen. You don't want to carry any risk with that kind of thing. You need it to be secure and safe and protected. Investing is very different. Investing is something about looking into the future. It's about taking on risk and being able to accommodate that risk as you go. So if I found this graph, and it illustrates it quite nicely. So the orange line would be somebody who's looking to save. It's conservative, it's safe, it kind of gradually just goes up. And so if you started on the left and you looked at the graph, there isn't really a point that the orange graph dips below your starting point. So you're never really at a place where you're worried about the 100,000 Rand that you invested being less than 100,000 Rand. It's going to slowly just accumulate over time. The blue line is the guy who's investing. Now, blue line's thing, it's aggressive. It has these fluctuations as things happen globally or in your country. And so it fluctuates to the point where potentially you could start out and in a year or two's time, the value on paper of the money that you invested could be less than what you put in. And then a lot of people say, I've lost money. You only on an investment lose money when you cash that out. Because while it's down, it's only on money. It's a monetary thing on a piece of paper. Investing requires the time for that blue graph to eventually go up to the point where it carries on staying above the orange line and it moves on. So investing is a long-term thing. And so when we look at retirement planning, that's usually long-term. And saving is something sort of short-term where I don't want to take on risk, but it's got a very different way of approaching it. And this is a question I often ask children when I do this presentation. If you were given the option today and somebody said to you, I can give you R1 million today, right now, or the alternative is I'll give you 1 cent today and I'll double that 1 cent every day for a month. So for 30 days. I'll give you 1 cent today, tomorrow I'll give you 2 cents, the next day 4 cents, the next day 8, 16. Which would you rather have? And so the R1 million sounds like a lot, and also it's instant, it's there, you can take it, and then a lot of people go like, I can invest that money, Sheldon. But even if you were to invest it in a month, you are never going to get to the point where the value of the compounded effect of that money of the 1 cent growing is going to be more than the R1 million. That R1 million that you're going to get is going to have a little bit of interest in the month, but the compound effect of that money doubling over time it's huge. You can't even understand how we get to the point. So in the space of 30 days, land up with 5 million Rand from starting out with 1 cent. And it's that compounded effect, and that's what investing is. It's the long-term effect of money that you leave and you're allowed to roll over time, and eventually that effect starts working to your advantage. So any investment that you put in, when you start and you have a look and you go, I've been putting the money into this portfolio for 2 years. It's hardly done anything. I'm wasting my time. It takes that long before that 1 cent becomes valuable to you. It's not going to happen very quickly. It's not going to take time for that to eventually accumulate, and you get that snowball effect of it just growing and growing and growing. And that's when Einstein said compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Just because what it allows you to do in your investment portfolios, but it takes time. It's the delayed gratification of having the million versus doing something and just waiting it out. So one of the big things I always warn people about as well is don't invest or disinvest because of what's happening around you. So headline news, things that you're hearing on the radio, a lot of people make decisions based on emotions because of what's being said. So they hear something, they panic, and they make a rash decision without having all the information that goes with it. Around elections is one of those times when stuff is coming out all the time and people panic and they start making decisions with their pension money, with their investments, because they're worried about what is going to happen in the future. And history will show you in any country with an investment, those cycles pick themselves up. So any dip that happens, if you have a look at, and most of us, we've been around long enough now, we've experienced what happened in 2008, the financial crisis. We were here with the COVID and what happened. We were here a couple months ago when Russia invaded Ukraine, and we saw what happened, and people panicked. And anybody that didn't panic and waited, history shows us that those cycles eventually fix themselves and everything goes back on track. So your personality and your expectations determine your investment risk. So how to invest between being that saver, that cautious investor, to an aggressive investor who's willing to take on risks in the markets is going to be dependent on you. And not everybody who invests something is going to be exactly the same. The people that are sitting here, the people that are listening online, every single person has got a different expectation, a different plan, and a different objective to get from their investment. And so every plan essentially should be different. And so you investing because of the way your friend invests is never going to be a good thing. Again, coming back to the consequences of delaying your plan. So I want to have a look. Remember John and Susan from our last 2 talks. So John at 22, although he made a bad decision in buying the new car and spending the money, he was intelligent enough to know that it's better for him to start soon in saving. And so John, from his first job, he took 1,000 Rand and he decided, I'm going to start putting this money aside. And so for the next 43 years of his working career, John puts 1,000 Rand. And I've used this calculation. He's not even increased his 1,000. It stays 1,000 Rand. So as inflation goes and as his salary increases, he's not even changing it. He sticks 1,000 Rand. And at age 65, he's accumulated just short of 7.5 million Rand by just putting 1,000 Rand into an investment every single month through his working career. His contributions over that time is only 516,000. That's what he's contributed to eventually have 7.4 million Rand in his portfolio. Susan, she was wise with the car, and because of that, she thought, you know what, I've been so sensible in the decision that I've made in purchasing a second-hand car. I'm actually going to now spend a bit of money on my clothes and all the other things. And she doesn't then start saving. And so she delays her saving by 10 years. And eventually she wakes up because she's chatted to John in the office. And John said how well his investment is doing. And she thought, I better get started. And so she starts with double the amount that John's paying. So she goes in 10 years later, 2,000 Rand a month, and she carries on saving until she gets to 65. That's her accumulated investment, having started 10 years later, paying double, and even her contributions are substantially more at the end of that period than what John had put in. And that's that effect of the compounded interest of starting early and allowing the interest to earn interest on interest on interest over that period. So John, almost 2 million Rand more than his colleague, and contributed 250,000 Rand less. So in these illustrations, I've used the same return on investment values. There's been no escalation on their contributions. So everything is identical. You can see the effects of just starting as soon as you can. So I always say to people that, and the thing that we need to think about always is when we're saving for our retirement, when we're saving for that sort of long-term thing, you've got to think along the lines of, one day I'm not going to be earning money. Most of us are salaried employed people. And there's going to come a day, unfortunately, that our contract's going to come to an end, or we're not going to be in a position to carry on with the work that we're doing. Age, health, whatever reason it might be. There's going to come a time that you are going to need money, and that money is going to have to come from somewhere. And so I always say to the people, when you're young, don't see it as this money that you're putting aside. See it as a paycheck that you're paying your future self. So every contribution you're making now is a salary check that you're going to be able to draw later. And that's how you've almost got to view it, is you've got to say, what I'm doing now is I'm putting down my salary that I want to potentially draw out at a later stage. And that's what you're doing. So first month, I put down a salary that I'm going to draw out first month of retirement. Next month, I contribute a salary that I want to draw out the next month. And so it carries on. And that's essentially what you're doing in your retirement planning, is you're paying yourself now money that you're going to have to access at a later stage. And sometimes with young people, it sort of starts clicking in because no young person can even foresee their future of retirement. It's too far away. But if we start understanding that it's going to come a day that your employer is not going to pay you anymore, you're going to have to get money from somewhere. What you're doing now is you are banking your salary now by starting early. You're sticking it into a bank account, into whatever it is, and come the day that you are now done, you're retired, you are now going to start paying yourself the salary that you had banked all those years ago. And we always have a look at it. It's called an opportunity cost. It's what is the loss that I have by spending the money versus saving it. So those opportunities that I have where I've got the opportunity to save the money, by not saving it, I've got to weigh up that opportunity cost that I had. Was the new pair of shoes, the dress, the better option than looking after my future self? And Mark Twain said, the secret of getting ahead is just getting started. So I want to quickly have a look at the history of retirement. I'm going to skim through this very quickly because it's quite a new concept. I did mention that last week. And sort of the first real signs of us identifying this is that the Roman Empire, for the guys that served in their military, when they sort of came to the end of their working career, they would be given something. It might be a piece of land or some coins or whatever it was. And then when the Industrial Revolution came, they realized on the factory lines it was important to have strong people who were able to work hard and work quickly. And so slowly they started replacing older people with younger people. And they got to the point where they realized you kind of need to do this more often. The people that were obviously being laid off then weren't working in jobs that were as physical, and so your life expectancy started increasing. And so that's where the whole thing came about. In 1881, it was probably the first recorded thing where a request was made to have this old age insurance program set up. And from that, it's almost sort of evolved to the point where most companies now, when you sign an employment contract, there's an end date where they go, we pretty much have determined that's enough that we've had of you at that age. Off you go. You must now look after yourself. The other problem with our retirement plan in our country is that because of various factors that have influenced it, a lot of businesses have gone to the point where they don't provide you pension funds anymore, any contributions to that, unless you're part of a big corporate. And so a lot of companies give you a cost to company. And so they'll say to you, this is the money we pay you. It's up to you to go and make your own plans. And unfortunately, without the education, a lot of young people are falling into the trap to go, I've got all this money. I know that my employer said I should do something around my retirement and a medical aid and savings. But you know what? It's so nice to have all the money in my bank account. I'm not going to do it now. I'll do it maybe next year. Next year rolls around and you become accustomed to spending the money, and so it carries on, and then you still don't do anything. And so that cost to company is a big problem because people don't want to spend their own money on these sorts of things. So why is it important? So most of the people in my generation have got this term, it's called the sandwich generation, where we almost caught up in this dilemma where we are looking after our parents who maybe haven't saved enough, but we've got kids of our own that we sort of having to still look after financially. And so we're sort of trapped in between this thing where we're looking after both sides, which results in us not having sufficient money to financially look after ourselves. And so you can kind of, I would imagine you're thinking about this already, you're creating a spiral effect, because if I'm not going to do it, it means I'm going to move into that old age section. I'm not going to have enough to look after myself. And so now I'm going to be dependent on my children. And so for them, they land up in the same situation where they're helping mom and dad out. They can't look after themselves. They have children. They're looking after the children. And so if we're not making the planning around our finances, we're going to land up in these traps, and it's very difficult to get out of it. So it's something to be aware of. If you find yourself if you know people that are going into that space, it's important that they just become aware of the consequences that go with that. And so on the retirement, this has become a hotly debated. I thought I must bring it in here, and we can just have a discussion around this two-pot system. I'm hoping that you haven't had your head stuck in a hole somewhere, and that you've seen it, you've heard about it, you've read about it, somebody else at the office has spoken to you about it. So our retirement planning up until 1st of September was always you put money into a pension fund or a retirement annuity, and when you got to retirement age after 55, there were two options. So you had a 1/3 cash option where you could withdraw up to 1/3 of your money and you could take it. The other 2/3 of the money had to be used to purchase an annuity that would pay you an income. And so those were your choices. And then from the 1st of September, the two-pot system came out. And so what happened was they created seed money from your current savings in your retirement annuity or your pension fund. And that seed money was out of your money. A lot of people thought it was free money that was just being handed out. It's not. It came out of your investment. So the money that you had already accumulated, all they did is they said, we are freeing some of that money up, because essentially after 55, when you were going to retire, you were going to get 1/3 of it anyway. So all that they said is we're going to sort of fast forward a bit, and we're going to give you access to some of it. And so the sum of it was 10% of the value of your fund up to the maximum of 30,000. So again, people saw 10% and they thought, brilliant. I've got quite a large pension fund of 3 million. I'm going to be able to walk away with 300,000. But it wasn't. It was 10% up to a maximum of 30,000. You could access that. Then what was left was, so if you did decide to take it or you didn't, whatever it was, there was an invested amount. So 1st of September, the vested amount would stay there. After the 1st of September, what happens now is all your contributions going into these things is now split into those two pots. So the cash pot and the annuity pot, your income pot. So every contribution that's been going in from the 1st of September is now split into these things. So once a year, you could effectively take your 1/3 that's gone into that first pot, the savings pot. So every year, 1/3 of the money. So let's just say your contribution into your retirement annuity, I'm going to use a round number, it's easy, 3,000 Rand. 1,000 Rand goes into the savings, 2,000 Rand goes into the retirement pot. Next month, the same thing. At the end of 12 months, you'll have 12,000 Rand in your savings pot, which you'll be allowed to take if you want. The other 24,000 Rand has gone into that retirement pot, which you cannot touch. And that will carry on going. So all they've done is they've taken those two things that were always available at retirement, and they've brought it forward, and they allowed you access to a small part of it every single year. The pitfalls of it, and this is the part that we have to be careful of, because again, a lot of people rush into this thing without really understanding it, without looking into it carefully enough. You pay tax on the amount that you're going to withdraw. Okay, so straight away, if you're going to take that money that you're allowed to take, you are going to be taxed at your marginal rate. So that table that Johan showed you earlier, whatever your tax rate is currently, you are going to be taxed on that amount according to that tax table, because it's now deemed to be more income that you are receiving. Okay? Any purchase afterwards, and this is again, the purpose of this was to create money for people that were struggling financially because of maybe debt that they had accrued, problems that they had, and so it was essentially give them some money after what's kind of happened from COVID and the repercussions of it, that they can help sort of fix some of the issues. Most people haven't. Most people have taken that money and they've gone straight to game, furniture shops, and they've spent the money. Johan told you there's 15% VAT on top of that as well. So what's happened is you've paid tax to SARS on the money you've taken. You've now taken your money and you've purchased something. You've given SARS another 15% of your money. So you've been taxed twice on this money, and at the end of it, you haven't really taken much out of it. So I've used this example just to illustrate. So John is 15 years from retirement. So he's 50, he's got 15 years until his employment contract comes to an end. He's in that bracket where he pays 26% tax. So I haven't even really put him in the top one. I've just sort of found probably an average working class person. So he's going to pay on his withdrawal of 30,000. He was lucky. He had a pension fund above 300,000. So he got the full 30,000. He gets taxed 7,800 Rand on that withdrawal. He then takes that money and he goes and buys something. He pays another 15% VAT on top of that. And so actually SARS has taken 11,000 Rand of that 30,000 Rand. So SARS has benefited from this whole thing. In fact, stats have come out from various companies that have been processing these, and Alexander Forbes was one of them, where they've estimated the value of the two-pot system currently is around about 4 billion Rand in tax that SARS has received back from all of this. That's a massive amount of revenue for SARS. And what I find fascinating is that a guy like John will moan about paying tax all the time, but he's happy to give SARS 7,800 Rand from his savings without any questions being asked. But he'll be upset every time he gets his pay slip and there's tax on there that he's having to pay, and he'll be trying to find ways to lower his tax and cheat tax and all the rest of it. But because 30,000 became available to him, you say to him, John, you're going to pay it. Yeah, that's fine. Not worried about the tax that he's about to pay on that money. Sorry, and then just to use, because if John was wise, he would say, Sheldon, I'm going to stick this money in my bond. I've got 15 years to pay off. My bond interest rate is 10.25. If I stick it in there, assuming he doesn't change anything else of the contributions he's making, he would save around 18,000 Rand in interest. So you go like, okay, that makes sense. He's got 22, he's put it in, he's got 18 back in savings. So 40 grand, maybe you could go, not a bad decision for John. If John were to leave his 30,000 in his investment, and I'm going to assume, yeah, it's 8%, very conservatively over 15 years, his investment in his retirement would have been 95,000 Rand better off having just left it in the investment. And you think if John does this annually and withdraws that money, how much money he's depleting from his retirement capital. You say, Sheldon, well, it was going to be money he was going to take anyway. The difference is, at the end, when you retire, you've got 550,000 Rand tax-free of that first amount of cash that you withdraw. When you withdraw in now, you're paying tax on each withdrawal that you make. And when you get to retirement, that 550 is going to be less all those deductions that you've taken over the years. So over 15 years, if John takes his 30,000 every year, he's going to have very little of his 550, which is tax-free, that he's actually going to be able to utilize. And so the effects of the decision that he makes isn't just a simple one. It's not just a little bit of tax that he's actually giving to SARS. The implications on his later planning is massive. If you start putting the numbers together as to what he's losing, again, the delayed gratification, the waiting out the 15 years and the impact that that money is going to have over 15 years versus that 18,000 Rand saving you could potentially have in the bond. And I'm not saying it's not always the case. Sometimes there is valid reason and it does make sense. My point is you need to have a look at the big picture before you make any decisions around your money, from an investment point of view and from a disinvestment point of view. Because the repercussions down the line sometimes are substantial. And we don't always look at those things. We just have a look at the here and now. And a lot of people, again, around the planning aren't willing to make the other adjustments. And so the quick fix for John was just to get the money out, and he didn't mind paying SARS, versus having a look at his scenario and go, John, is there not another way that we can accommodate the change you need to make? Is there not a lifestyle change that you could maybe do to put yourself in the position to put the extra bit of money into your bond or whatever it is that you are worried about? So your taxes, just quickly on your retirement money. So contributions, as Johan said, is one way of lowering your tax. So any contribution you make to your pension fund or a retirement annuity in your personal name, you can lower your tax. So those are tax deductible. Your first 1/3 at retirement, so after the age of 55, when you decide to retire from your fund, your first 1/3, the 550 of that is tax-free, less any withdrawals that you've made along the way. So if you've taken money out of pension funds when you resigned, or you've now taken the money out of this new two-pot system, that will be deducted from your 550. The other 2/3 goes into an annuity and you draw an income. That income then is going to be taxed. So the money that SARS have given you as a little deduction by your contributions, they will slowly start collecting some of that back. So when you then are drawing your pension fund, you're going to pay a little bit of tax on that pension money. And then with withdrawals when resigning, so again, a lot of people when they resign and they leave pension funds, so pre-1st of September, people that had money in preservation funds as well, that money is still available to them, but when you make a withdrawal from that, you're going to be taxed again. There's a tax table that goes with it. So those are the taxes that are linked to our retirement. Okay, so in ending, some of the tips. So as I said earlier, invest early. The earlier you invest, you allow yourself to benefit from the compound interest over many, many, many years. And for young people, do it before your commitments come. It's easier to invest and invest as much as you can before all the commitments come of homes, families, those sorts of things, which are unfortunately going to put you under financial stress. And so if you can start early and start accumulating, it's easier when those things come for you to cut back where you need to cut back. And I've got a lot of people who are still on plan and on track with where they wanted to be by starting early. And so it doesn't mean because you've started there, that plan has to stay exactly the same. As your life changes, your plan should adjust with you. Invest for longer. So extra contributions, money that you have out of bonuses and that, find ways where you can utilize that money to your advantage. Withdraw wisely out of pension funds or the two-pot systems. Even when you're disinvesting from stuff, are you making the best decision on how you're disinvesting? Review your plan as plans change. So like I say, if you've started and things come up, so buying a house, starting a family, going maybe back because you want to add to your degree that you've got and now you've taken a sabbatical and you're not going to be working. Change your plan as you go. Plan should never be concrete all the way through. There's very few people that I know that can start a plan at age 22 like John and carry it all the way through without it being derailed somewhere or needing to adjust it. I mean, that's just a scenario that I've used to give you numbers to illustrate it. But plans are going to change as you sort of grow, as your career changes and evolves. Move with your plans, plan with your moves. Review your plan as you change and then live well and budget. If you look after yourself, if you look after the finances, if you manage your money, it's going to work better for you. And then where do we start? So the first one I always say to people is just the acknowledgement that planning is important. And even if it's tough now, if you say, Sheldon, in the beginning you spoke about this budget and I haven't quite got that to grips, that's fine. The acknowledgement that you understand that is important is your first step. But then you need to put something in place to say, I'm giving myself 3 months to get this sorted. And then it's got to be down to say, I'm now going to tackle the next stage. And that is fixing the problems that I had. So I'm going to get this sorted. But we've got to have those things in place. There's got to be almost like a concrete thing that says, at that point, I've got to take the next step. Or at that point, I'm going to be doing this. Because if we just keep going, we're going to land up back at the same place, struggling with the same problems. Have that plan. And if you don't have a plan, speak to somebody who can assist you. But it's important to have that plan. And if that plan, like I said to you, is literally saying, I'm going to take 3 months to get my budget sorted out so I know where I am and where I can go, and then my plan is going to start. Make sure you stick to it. And one of the big things is always, if you can't, make somebody accountable. Somebody that you can go to, a friend, a colleague, a family member to say, you need to hold me to this, that in 3 months I need to get this sorted. That somebody's going to be on your case about getting it fixed. And then decide where you want to go, whether you want to do it alone, whether you need assistance. Some people have got the time, they've got the acumen to be able to put that kind of stuff together. They're happy to research and track it and do that kind of stuff. They can spend the time managing their own stuff. Other people couldn't be bothered, they don't want to do it. You must decide what type of a person you are. And then you've got to start. That's the only way, is if you don't start, then nothing's going to happen. The quote earlier they had from Mark Twain is you've got to start. You've got to just get the process started. And I want to end with this: is don't make uneducated investment decisions because of things that you've read or heard. Too many people come into our offices on a daily basis because they've spoken to somebody at a bar or at a party, and they're getting an investment decision advice from somebody, or tax planning advice from somebody who's not a tax practitioner. And then they'll come and they say they want to do this and do this. Their plan isn't your plan. Your plan is going to be unique to you. Don't take the decisions that somebody else is doing or saying as the gospel, because often they don't tell you the whole story. So the person who made a lot of money doing something doesn't tell you the other stories that go with that, and the lost opportunities that they had, or the mistakes that they made to get to that point. So when you do hear these things, I say to people, be wary of just jumping in because somebody said that that's the next best thing, without you doing a bit of research on your own, or having somebody to bounce the ideas off of. There's too many bad decisions made by people listening to people who are uneducated giving advice to people. So again, I think we're on time. Yeah. Again, I know it was a rush through it. I know it probably doesn't help as far as what do I really do. But I think the most important thing is the plan. It's the plan for you to acknowledge I need to be doing something. And for the young people that are here, the young people that are listening, the sooner you start, the better it's going to be later on. As tough as it is having to part with that money, just believe me when I say to you, you're buying a better future. Whatever you're doing now when you start young is going to be an advantage to you later on in life. Share the story of Melanie from last week. Just again, going to close a bank account, money being there from her starting ages ago, which she had forgotten about. You start just doing something, quickly that habit forms, it accumulates, and before long you're going to have that scenario where you go like, oh, this is fantastic. So good luck in your planning. And next week's our last one, and I hope to see us all back. Thank you.